In this video tutorial, we're going to learn how to make a beach scene using multiple images and primarily the pen tool. So first I opened up all of the images that I need to use. So I have my beach background, beach dog, drink, the person, shovel, and the modern airplane. If you notice when you scroll up to the top, I'm looking at my image at 16.7%, which means that it's quite a large image. You can go down to the zoom tool here, or you can hit Command or Control plus, and that'll zoom into your scene. Moving on to the beach dog, this is where I'm going to start off, and I'm going to zoom in really nice and close so I can see what I'm doing. And as I'm even noticing, I can see there's a big chunk out of his head. So when I'm using the pen tool, I'm going to have to actually go much closer in so I have a nice clean edge. Clicking on your sidebar here, this is your pen tool. We're going to make sure that we're using it as a selection and not a shape. So right now it is set to shape with a zero fill and a stroke. I don't want to create a shape, I actually want to create a path. So you have to make sure that you have it selected to path, and then you can start working. The first thing is you always just make a click. Click, let go of your mouse, and that starts your path. The second click, I'm going to go kind of in the middle of his head here, is I'm clicking and dragging. And how you drag is always opposite of the direction. So I'm dragging right now my cursor to the right, which means that the curve is actually going to the left. It can be a little bit confusing at the beginning, but you'll get used to it. Right now I have a handle here. If I don't remove this handle, then what's going to happen is the computer is just going to want to make this Bezier curve go into a circle. It's a natural default for the Adobe product, and I don't want that. So you have two options. You can delete this handle or you can drag the handle in. I'm just going to delete it. So right now, if I put my cursor over top of my anchor point right in the middle, you'll see that you get this little slash. Click on it and you can remove your handle. And if it's not happening and it's not removing it, hold Alt and click and then it'll remove it. So depending on the application, sometimes it will actually remove it when you just click, and sometimes you actually have to hit the Alt. And then I'm just going to go again and make another point. So I'm clicking and dragging. And for me, I have to actually hit Alt, Alt, click, and Alt, click. So clicking and dragging, I'm not just clicking and letting go of my mouse. I am actually clicking and dragging. And you kind of want to use the least amount of anchor points as possible. That way you just get a nice smooth curve. And if you want to move around the canvas without having to go and grab the hand, you can hit your space bar and it turns into a hand. And make sure you always have your edge inside so that you don't get any of that sand. We don't want the sand. We only want part of the dog. And if you want to zoom in, you can always Control plus and zoom in and get a really nice clean edge. Now the most important part now at the end here is you have to make sure that your last point touches your first point. And how you know that it's going to connect is you're going to see that little circle there. So you can click and now you have a connected path. If you go over on your paths, you can see that it says work path here. If you don't see your paths, you can go up to Window, scroll down, and Paths, and it would come up. What I want to do now is I want to create this into a selection. You have a few different options because with Adobe Photoshop, it always gives you a few different options. You can right click inside here and hit make selection. Always make sure that you don't want a feathered radius, you want a hard edge, so you'd have 0 and press OK. And now you can see that I have my feathered edge, which means those little dancing ants are a selection. So you can hit Control C or Command C on a Mac, go to your beach background. The other option you could have had is if I just hit Control D, deselect. I can go to my paths, click on my working path, and then over on the side here, it says load path as a selection, so now I have my selection. And then just going back onto my layers, I want to make sure that if I had multiple layers that I had the right layer selected. I could hit, again, the Control C, Command C, and go back to the beach background and paste it in. Now that you have your dog brought in, we have to scale him down to size. So hit Command T, Control T, and you bring up your transform box. If you're using the brand new Photoshop, you don't have to hold Shift. It should automatically scale it down with proper proportions. But if you're using an older version of Photoshop, you will have to hold Shift. Otherwise, it will scale it and make it wonky. So once I have the size I want, I can even move it around if I put my cursor inside the box here, and then I'll hit enter. Another way to move objects around the canvas is make sure you're on the move tool, which is this top one, and you can move it around. I want to flip the dog now. So what I have to do is go up to Edit, Transform, and I want to flip horizontally. So the dog is just kind of looking out to the water instead of looking out into nothing. Over here I have layer 1. I'm going to call it dog so that I don't mess up my layers. Okay, now I can close down this beach dog. I would always advise you saving this to your documents, to your student drive, just because you've already created your path. If for some reason you need to go back at it, at least you have it. But for now, I'm not going to save it. On to the drink. So again, let's zoom in and start my path. Very first point is just click, let go. Second one, because this is a straight line, it's pretty easy. I just click and let go. Again, straight line, click and let go. Now the curves start coming in, so I'm going to zoom in a little bit more, hitting Control plus, and then clicking and dragging. So I have not let go of my mouse. I'm actually clicking and dragging. And then again, you have different options of pulling in your handle or removing this handle. I want to remove it. That's how I work. I find it a lot easier. So I'm going to hold Alt and remove that last curve. Alt, remove that last curve. So clicking and dragging, clicking Alt and removing the handle. And I'll just speed this up now. Oh, for some reason I ended up making 2 anchor points. So I can go back in my history up here. And clicking back, oh, I see what happened is it didn't remove the handle, instead it made another anchor point. And again, your first point and your last point must meet. So when I scroll over my first point, I get that little circle, and that tells me I can connect. So again, there's a few different ways that you can turn this into a selection. Right click inside, make selection, 0 radius, and then hit Control C, over onto your beach background, Control V, copy and paste, And then again, it's too large, so Control T brings up your transform box. And again, if you're on an older version of Photoshop, you must hold Shift and pull in only from the four corners. And then I'm going to drag this over and hit enter when I'm happy. I like to make it so that the dog is enjoying his beverage. So edit, transform, flip horizontally. And now I want to move it. So I'm going to click on the move tool and bring it over. I'm going to zoom in and just make sure I'm on the move tool again. And I'm going to move this up to his mouth. So now I have the dog and I have the drink. I went ahead and just labeled it. So I can close the drink down. Again, please save it. Always save everything because it has your path. So you never know what could happen if your computer froze and you didn't have your beach background saved. At least it would be easy enough to bring them back in. So I'm going to show you another technique on how to remove this background. It's a solid white background. In some instances, you might actually be able to get PNGs that have transparency, TIFFs with transparency, or maybe you have a solid white background that is easy enough to remove. So over on the side here, I'm going to use the magic wand tool. And with the magic wand tool, it's really important to try to figure out the tolerance. So if I had this set to, let's say, 100, it's going to pick up like pixels that are within 100 range. So I have a white background and I have a lot of white values on the airplane. So that's why it's actually not picking up much. If I change it down to 10 and I hit Control D, deselect what I had, you'll notice that I have a much tighter curve inside. So if I zoom in, you can see my edge is a lot smoother. Is this really the best way to get around this image? Probably not. If you're doing this for print, you have to be a lot pickier on your edges than you would if you were doing it for web. Because again, print is the 300 dpi and then the web is the 72. So you have a lot more leniency when you're dealing with web-based images. So let's zoom out for a second and let's say that I am happy with this. Right now, if I were to copy it, it would actually copy the white. What I want to do is copy the plane. So up at the top, select inverse, and now I have my airplane selected. Control C, go over to your beach background, Control V, and I have my airplane. I need to go onto my move tool and move up my airplane in the sky. For now, I'll just kind of keep it up about there so it kind of looks like it's trailing off from this path. And rename this. Again, I always zoom in. Using the pen tool, I make my first click. And second one is click and drag. And I'm moving my cursor down, but you'll see that the curve, the Bezier curve, is actually going up. Alt, click that last point. And again, you can kind of make your own shape with the hat. Right here, I probably should have made a point in between because it's just not working that well. So what I'm going to do is just redo that. And make sure that you go inside her hair. You don't want to get all these flyaways. If you look at any magazines, you'll notice that the girl's flyaway hair is more than likely cut off. And again, your first point has to meet your last point. So when you get that little circle, you can click. And here I have my path. One thing to note is you might be wondering why I went a lot more closer in on her body. It's because I didn't want to get this shadow, this reflection from the water, and I just wanted a smooth edge. So at this point, you have a couple options. You'll notice that there are some little circle parts that we need to get out of here. What you can do is you can add to your selection, or as some people like to do, is they would just copy this and then go back in and remove that. So if you have it and you want to add to your selection, you can click over here and you can have combine shapes, subtract from shape, intersect shape, and exclude overlapping shapes. Go back to the pen tool here, zoom in. So I already have one closed object. And now what I'm going to do is click on and make another shape. So I have one path, two paths, and now I'm going to have a third path. So I'm going to hold this down and I'm going to hit the convert point tool and select my three paths. So I'm holding shift and I'm selecting my three paths. If I go into my path area, you'll see my working path, it all is into one layer. And I'm going to go over and hit the selection tool. So I've loaded my selection and then I'll copy it and paste it onto my beach background. And if I zoom in, you can see that she does have the transparency between her arms. And with the move tool, I'm just going to move her somewhere down by the water. Going to my layers, I'll just rename this the girl, and maybe I'll have her sitting at the bottom. Okay, so I can close this down. Again, I suggest you save it. And the shovel. Shovel is the same as the last one, so you will have to create two paths. If you ever don't like one of your moves that you just did, you have two options. Your Control Z will remove you back to that one last point. Another option is going over to your history over here or window history, and you can go back a few points that way. I'm just going to change the shape of that. That had an awkward dent there. And I just kind of want to avoid the sand just in case the sand was another color in the other document. And I'm just going to click and drag to create a curve on my last point. So here you have the one path, and now we have to zoom into this top section. And I'm going to create that secondary path. And if I zoom out, you will see that I have both selected. So if I go over to my paths, and if I hold down and hit the convert point tool, I will have both items selected if I hold shift and select both. And then I can go over to this third thing at the bottom here where it says load path as selection. So I have my selection, Control C or Command C. And then here is my shovel. And now to scale it down, Control T, hold shift if you have an older Photoshop application, and pull in from the sides. And this just could have been left over from some little kid. And I'll just scale it down. And if I'm happy, hit enter. And if you want to move it, click on the move tool and you can move it wherever you like. And just rename it. So how you want to lay out your objects is up to you. You can flip them, you can scale them, try to make it look somewhat realistic. I'm not expecting you to work with lighting at this point, but just the proper using of the pen tool is what I'm really concerned with.